Okay, so we hear it all the time, right? A federal government shutdown means, well, basically national catastrophe. But what if that's not quite the whole story? What if the real crisis actually shows us a government that's maybe just too big, so bloated that the truly critical stuff keeps running anyway? Which kind of begs the question, does Uncle Sam need to go on a serious fiscal diet? Welcome to the deep dive. This analysis is really for you, the learner, who wants to get past the headlines, past the noise about the federal funding standoff. We're going to cut through all those, apocalyptic warnings you see everywhere. And we're going to focus on three things. First, what a shutdown actually impacts versus what keeps going. Second, how America's staggering $33.1 trillion national debt is really fueling this whole fight. And third, the political tactics, the gamesmanship, used to sort of dodge accountability for what looks like chronic budget failure because federal spending authority is expiring. And even though House Republicans managed to pass a short-term fix, a clean continuing resolution, or CR it seems Senate Democrats are putting up roadblocks, this isn't just some technical Washington deadlock. It feels more like an ideological battle over the sheer size and the function of the federal government itself. Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe start with a reality check. Why does the media hype around these deadlines often feel so disconnected from what actually happens when funding lapses?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's fascinating because, well, a lot of the hysteria often is unwarranted. A huge chunk of what the federal government does is either mandatory spending or deemed essential, which means, it just keeps going, whether Congress passes those yearly appropriations bills on time or not.
Okay, so if you're a veteran or maybe a senior citizen, the benefits you count on, those are mandatory. They're protected by law. They're safe.
Absolutely. Things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those keep flowing. And specifically for veterans, VA disability checks, pensions, education benefits, even veteran burials, those are all mandatory payments. They won't be disrupted.
Because the money's already set aside, essentially, from laws passed before.
Exactly. It's effectively locked in.
And beyond those benefit checks, what about critical government functions? You call them essential services. They keep running too, drawing money straight from the Treasury.
That's right. Things deemed essential, think national security, border patrol, law enforcement, disaster response, air traffic control, maintaining the power grid, all that continues. And the Postal Service, importantly, operates independently, so mail delivery isn't affected either.
Huh. And what about federal workers themselves? What's the immediate impact?
Well, for most federal employees, if the lapse is pretty short, say under 2 weeks, paychecks usually still arrive on time, and historically, even for longer shutdowns, almost everyone who gets furloughed eventually gets back pay.
So the immediate doomsday scenarios often don't quite pan out that way.
They really don't match that reality, no.
But okay, there is real disruption for some people, right? Especially folks who need more direct support services. Our sources point out that key VA support does stop, like outreach programs, regional offices closing down, career counseling just halts.
That's true. Those high-touch services can definitely be impacted.
And while air traffic control is essential, didn't we see during the 2018-19 shutdown that if unpaid TSA agents and controllers just don't show up for work, air travel can get massively snarled?
Yes, that's a crucial caveat. Essential doesn't always mean seamless if the workforce isn't getting paid. And, this actually brings up the political side of the disruption. There's this tactic, sometimes called the Washington Monument Syndrome.
Ah, right. Where administrations maybe make the shutdown seem worse than it has to be.
Yeah.
For political leverage.
Exactly. They can deliberately aim to inflict maximum public pain, often over highly visible symbolic things.
Like closing park gates, even if guarding them costs more money.
Precisely that. In 2013, the Obama administration famously blocked access to open-air places, like the World War II Memorial. And reports at the time suggested that, keeping them closed and guarded was actually more expensive than just leaving them open as usual.
Wow. So it's a deliberate strategy to make the public mad and pressure Congress.
It's designed to increase pressure, yes. Get people demanding a quick resolution and often more funding for the agencies involved.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. Many of our sources argue the real crisis isn't the shutdown itself. It's the fact that Congress seems completely incapable of doing its main constitutional job, passing an annual budget on time.
It really is a chronic institutional failure. The federal fiscal year starts October 1st, and Congress hasn't managed to get all 12 of the required appropriations bills done on time since, wait for it, 1997.
1997, that's staggering.
It is. We're basically living in a permanent state of emergency funding, continuing resolutions, these manufactured crises.
So from a conservative perspective presented in the sources, what's the root cause of this perpetual gridlock?
Well, sources aligned with that view argue this dysfunction is almost baked into the system now. They say it reflects a really deep, maybe even necessary ideological divide over the proper size and scope of the federal government.
So not just about negotiating details, it's a fundamental disagreement.
Right. The problem from this viewpoint isn't just the negotiation process itself, it's the sheer volume of things Congress is expected to fund and fight over. Everything from, core national defense priorities down to, as one source put it, special interest handouts like maple syrup subsidies.
Using examples like that to argue the government is just trying to do way too much.
Exactly. And the core fiscal argument driving this is that the country's been on what they call a wildly destructive spending spree.
And the numbers are hard to ignore.
Yeah.
That $33.1 trillion national debt figure.
Yeah, the numbers definitely frame the urgency. $33.1 trillion. And sources warn pretty starkly that this trajectory leads towards, well, bankruptcy and hyperinflation.
So from this conservative standpoint, the answer isn't just getting along better in Congress. It's actually shrinking the government.
That's the fundamental argument, yes. The solution to the chronic gridlock isn't just procedural tweaks. It's about fundamentally reducing the federal government's footprint.
Less government means less to fight over each year.
That's the logic. The proposed solution involves trimming that long list of federal responsibilities and devolving programs, things like air traffic control, maybe infrastructure funding, some welfare programs back to the states, local governments, or even private entities.
The idea being that makes the country less vulnerable to Washington gridlock.
And saves money.
Both. Reduce vulnerability and achieve significant budget savings. I mean, consider this. Federal aid makes up nearly a third of all state general fund revenues.
Wow, a third.
Yeah. It shows how much local stuff relies on what some call that big ATM machine in Washington.
Okay, let's pivot back to the current stalemate then. Who exactly wants what right now? What are the specific sticking points holding up this clean funding bill?
Right. So House Republicans under Speaker Johnson, they did pass a clean continuing resolution, just a temporary short-term thing, no big policy changes attached. Basically, keep the government open while they keep negotiating the bigger budget deals. Okay, it seems straightforward enough. So why the holdup in the Senate? What are the Democratic demands that Republicans say are holding government funding hostage?
Well, the language coming from Republican sources is definitely strong. They accuse Democrats of demanding, quote, radical left policies and massive spending hikes.
Okay, but what specifically? Are there examples?
Yes. Specific demands cited include things like extending subsidies for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, and also restoring some Medicaid funding that might have been cut.
Okay. Policy differences, sure.
Yeah.
But radical. $3.5 trillion hike? That sounds significant for just a short-term CR.
It does. And the most, let's say, inflammatory claims from the Republican side are that Democrats are demanding things like free health care to illegal aliens and adding, $3.5 trillion spending hike into what's supposed to be just a simple stopgap bill.
So the accusation is it stops being just about funding the government temporarily and it becomes this huge vehicle for unrelated policy wins.
That's exactly the charge. It turns the CR into an omnibus bill by another name. And the political blame game is really heating up. Speaker Johnson urged Democrats to follow common sense, accusing them of holding the American people hostage.
And didn't another Republican leader suggest this might even be intentional?
Yes, Senate Republican leader John Thune suggested that Senator Schumer might actually want a shutdown, believing it benefits their political base, the far left, as he put it.
So they're weighing political advantage against, well, keeping the government running.
That's the implication, that political calculations are potentially outweighing functional governance.
Okay, this is more than just the usual budget squabble then. Our sources seem to suggest there's a deeper constitutional conflict brewing underneath all this, about who really controls the money.
Yes, and this is a really critical layer to understand, especially concerning the executive branch. President Trump has made what many experts call unprecedented claims about presidential power. Specifically, the power to simply impound, basically withhold funds that Congress has already authorized if he personally disagrees with how it's being spent.
Which seems to directly challenge Congress's power of the purse, right? That's Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. Congress controls the spending.
It absolutely does challenge that. And adding to that tension, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, who's known as a strong advocate for broad presidential power, has reportedly pushed the administration to think about sending out reduction in force notices, RAF notices.
Wait, RIF notices, those aren't the same as temporary furloughs during a shutdown, are they? Those are permanent layoffs.
Exactly. These are permanent layoff notices targeting federal employees in programs the administration deems not consistent with the president's priorities or programs that lack mandatory funding streams.
Wow, that's a massive escalation, moving from temporary disruption to potentially permanent changes in the federal workforce dictated by the White House.
It signals a potential strategy to pursue mass layoffs, perhaps targeting specific agencies like, say, the Department of Education or the EPA. One conservative analyst suggested this might be a tactic to show Democrats that demanding more spending could actually backfire, leading to permanent reductions in government size, driven by the executive branch, regardless of what Congress appropriates.
So this creates a huge trust issue, doesn't it?
A profound lack of trust, and it explains why Democrats, according to the sources, are insisting that any final budget deal has to be absolutely ironclad and in legislation.
Because they don't trust the administration to stick to a verbal agreement, given these claims of unilateral power.
Precisely. A handshake deal isn't seen as reliable anymore.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what's the bigger picture here?
Well, government shutdowns are obviously highly political events. We see that every time. But they're also fundamentally a consequence of this chronic budget failure we talked about, combined with a really deep ideological split over how big the federal government should even be. The chaos we see now, it reflects a genuine clash, not just over dollars and cents, but over fiscal responsibility and constitutional authority.
And the conservative viewpoint we've discussed, presented in our sources, argues this chaos, maybe even the shutdown itself, is actually a necessary, if painful, step towards getting the budget under control. The fact that essential services do continue is presented as proof that the government is much larger than it needs to be, that it acts too often like that big ATM machine just funding local stuff.
Right. And with the debt at $33.1 trillion and warnings about potential hyperinflation, the argument is that this spending debate isn't just posturing. It's seen as a crucial fight over whether the country will adhere to fiscal discipline and constitutional limits, or continue down a path of ever-expanding bureaucracy and debt.
So our final takeaway for you, the learner. Yes, partisan politics are all over the headlines. But beneath that, this shutdown debate is really about structural failure in Congress and deep ideological divisions about the role of government itself. How this fight resolves could really set the course for America's debt and the scope of its government for a long time to come.
Yeah, and maybe here's something to think about. Consider the services in your own community. Your roads, maybe welfare programs, local nonprofits. How many rely, at least partly, on federal funding? Now imagine if Congress actually did its constitutional job and passed a proper budget with all 12 bills on time every single year. Would you be more aware or maybe less aware of how much of your state's budget really comes from Washington? And would that change how you engage with politics locally or nationally?